Today on Bakes and Blenders, we are going to be making salted caramel cheesecake entremets inspired by an amazing book called The Wind of Walkers and Blades by Kelly Farina. Stay tuned until the end for a much simpler trifle version of this dessert. For these entremets, we're going to be making a salted sand crumble, a salt rum caramel, cinnamon infused cheesecake mousse, espresso sablé, and a sapphire mirror glaze. Then I'll show you how to put it all together. Add the sugar, butter, and salt to a bowl and beat with a hand mixer until well combined. For this crumble, we're basically making a shortbread cookie, one massive cookie that we will bake and then crumble up to get a nice sandy consistency. Add the egg and mix until combined. You can find links to these recipes in the description box below this video. Add the flour and beat until almost combined, stop, and then finish mixing the cookie dough by hand with your spatula. Grab a baking sheet lined with a silicone mat and we're going to spread out our dough. Use an offset spatula to create a rectangle of even, smooth dough. Mine ended up being about 8 by 11 inches. The exact size doesn't matter, but you do want it to be even and roughly those dimensions. Bake at 340 degrees Fahrenheit for roughly 10 to 15 minutes until the cookie is a nice light golden brown. My edges got a little darker than I planned, but it's not a big deal. Once our giant cookie sheet is completely cool, it should be nice and crisp. If there are any dark edges, go ahead and trim those off. Break the cookie apart and pulse in a food processor until you have a nice sandy consistency. This salted sand crumble represents the coastal setting of the book The Wind of Walkers and Blades. Store your crumble in an airtight container on the counter until we're ready to assemble our entremets. It's got a delicious, buttery, sweet, salty flavor that really complements the caramel filling in this entremet. For a dry caramel, we start by putting some sugar into our pan over medium heat. While your sugar is heating up, in another saucepan, you need to combine your heavy cream, sugar, and light corn syrup, and salt too. You want to bring this almost to a simmer because we want this liquid to be hot when we add it to our hot caramel. Once you notice your sugar start to melt, you can start to stir your sugar so that it melts evenly and becomes a nice lovely amber. In this video, I'm making a double batch, so when you make it at home, your quantities are going to look a little bit different. You don't want to add too much sugar to your pan at once, otherwise it won't cook evenly and it could crystallize. So if all of your sugar doesn't fit in an even layer on the bottom of your pan to start with, you can start adding any remaining sugar as the sugar melts and combines. You may notice some lumps in your caramel. At this point, this is nothing to be concerned about. It will melt eventually, so just keep stirring and heating your caramel. You're going to continue to cook the caramel until you have the desired color. Shoot for a dark amber color. The darker the color, the more intense the flavor. However, if you burn your sugar, that will be very bitter and unpleasant, so use your best judgment. As soon as your sugar is at the right color, gradually begin pouring in your hot cream mixture. Start by adding just a little bit because this is going to bubble up quite a bit. Stir the caramel well. Once the bubbling begins to subside, you can begin to slowly, gradually add a little bit more cream. Repeat this process until it's all combined. Now, if your cream mixture is not warm enough, the drastic temperature change between the hot caramel and the cream can cause your caramel to seize. Mine was almost too cool, and so I thought I was gonna ruin it. There were some lumps at first, but in the end it turned out just fine. Once the cream has been added to the caramel, you've stirred, it's well combined, add a candy thermometer, and we're going to cook this mixture until it hits 220 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, like I said, at this point I was panicking a tiny bit because I could feel some lumps in the bottom of my pan. However, cooking it longer melted any lumps that might have been in there, and everything was just the way I needed it to be. Remove the caramel from the heat and cool it down to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Then pour the warm caramel over the milk and white chocolate. Stir until there are no lumps of chocolate remaining. Let this mixture cool until it reaches 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and it shouldn't take long at this point. Now you can add your butter and your rum. Stir until the butter is completely melted. At this point, your caramel is still super liquidy and a little bit warm, so I suggest using an immersion blender just to get the entire thing mixed, combined, emulsified, and so there are no lumps remaining. If you're enjoying this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe so you can see more of my videos. Now, I've made desserts very similar to this cheesecake entremet before, and what I usually do for the insert that's going to go inside the mousse is use this tiny little half sphere mold. Works great every time, right? Well, it did not work. My caramel never set up in the freezer, so I decided to ignore the mold and just pipe the caramel into my mousse. You'll see when we get there in just a moment. Add your heavy cream and 2 to 3 cinnamon sticks to a small saucepan, and we're going to heat that until it is steaming and nice and super hot, stirring occasionally. Turn off the heat and cover the pan and let it sit for about 15 minutes. Then we'll put it in an airtight container in the fridge overnight. It's the next day, so we're going to start by combining our unflavored gelatin and our water. Stir until there are no lumps, then set aside so it can bloom. Strain your cinnamon-infused cream to remove any of the chunks, and then measure out the amount you'll need for the mousse and place it in a small saucepan. Heat the cream until it is steaming, then set it aside and mix together your egg yolks and sugar. Once those are thoroughly combined, slowly begin tempering your hot liquid into the egg yolk mixture. Stir constantly to prevent the egg yolk from cooking and becoming lumpy. Once all of your hot cream has been added and combined, you can pour the mixture back into your saucepan. When you do this, I suggest that you don't drop your bowl into the saucepan, that it fits in almost perfectly. That was a little frustrating, so just be careful. Return the custard to a low to medium-low heat and continue to cook and whisk until it hits 180 degrees. You can start to tell that your custard is approaching the correct temperature when you tilt the saucepan and you can see the custard coating the bottom and it's getting a bit thicker. Once your custard is ready, turn off the heat and add your bloomed gelatin. Stir and whisk until the gelatin is completely melted. Use a spatula to stir and mash your room temperature cream cheese until it's nice and smooth. Then you can pour your hot cream over the cream cheese and whisk until it's smooth. I did this in 2 portions. By adding a little bit at first and then whisking, I feel that this minimizes the number of lumps you can end up with. I almost forgot about it, but using a sieve to pass your custard through can really remove any bits of egg that might have gotten curdled or any lumps of gelatin that didn't melt. It's not necessary, but it does help. Set your cream cheese mixture aside to cool down to 82 degrees Fahrenheit. When it's almost there, you can start to whip up the remaining heavy cream. Whip your cold, heavy cream until you have soft peaks. At this stage, the cream will slightly hold its shape, but when you lift the whisk out, the peak will tip over. Gently fold the whipped cream into the slightly cooled down cream cheese mixture. I like to start by just adding a bit of the cream to loosen up the mixture first. It's not terribly thick, you could add it all at once. It's not that big of a deal. To fold the whipped cream in, you want to work your way around the bowl. Think about folding something on top of itself. You're lifting up the cream underneath and folding it over top. Repeat this process, occasionally cutting through the mixture. Using a scoop, spoon, or piping bag, fill your mold about halfway with your cream cheese mousse. Then use a small offset spatula to spread the mousse up the edges of your mold. Pipe a swirl of our salt rum caramel on top of the mousse. And like I said, every element in this recipe ties into the book The Wind of Walkers and Blades. The salt rum caramel represents Francie, our female main character. She is very sweet, loved by all, and there are some funny memories involving salt rum. The cinnamon-infused cheesecake mousse represents Arturian, one of our male main characters. He is rich, but there's a complexity to him. Top the caramel with more mousse, then use your offset spatula to smooth off and wipe away any excess, giving us a flat surface. You want to work fairly quickly because the longer this mousse sets, the more the gelatin will set up. And as you'll notice, at the beginning, the mousse is quite liquidy, but by the end, it's already holding its shape. Pop your molds in the freezer for at least several hours, though I suggest overnight. After a few hours, I do like to go in and just cover them with a bit of cling wrap to make sure they don't absorb any smells from the freezer. Into the bowl of your stand mixer, sift your all-purpose flour, powdered sugar, espresso powder, and salt. Mix that until just combined. Now you're going to add your cold cubed butter and mix until it becomes a coarse, sandy consistency. It may seem like it's taking forever, but this will just take a couple of minutes. There may be a few larger lumps of butter mixed in your dry ingredients, and that's okay, but overall it should look like coarse sand. Add a lightly beaten egg and mix on a low speed just until the dough comes together. At first, it may look like there's not enough moisture to pull all the dry ingredients together, but eventually it will, and as soon as it does, stop your mixer. You do not want to overmix. Turn your dough out onto some cling wrap, press it into a flat disc, wrap it up, and put it in the fridge for about 30 minutes to an hour. So this espresso sablé represents another one of our male main characters, and that's Levick. He is the base of their friendship group, and there's a little something about him that provides a little lift. Let's take our chilled dough out of the fridge and we're going to roll it between 2 sheets of parchment paper. Since it's a little stiff from being in the fridge, I like to kind of smash it a bit with my rolling pin before I start rolling. We are rolling this espresso sablé dough out to about 2 to 3 millimeters in thickness. I am using a rolling pin that has guides on the sides. It makes a huge difference. I'll put a link below to the rolling pin and the other equipment that I'm using. Now, rolling the dough out between the parchment paper sheets makes a huge difference. We don't have to use any more flour. There's no mess, no stick to deal with, and it's easy to transfer our dough in and out of the fridge or freezer. Once our dough is at the correct thickness, we're going to pop it in the freezer for 10 minutes so that it's nice and easy to cut. Take your dough out of the freezer, flip it over, and remove the parchment paper on the back. Then immediately replace that parchment paper, flip it over, and remove the parchment from the top. This ensures that our dough is not going to be stuck to the bottom part of the parchment when we're cutting. Use a circle cutter that is just slightly larger than the base of your molds to start cutting out discs of sablé. As you cut them out, place the circles of sablé on either a baking sheet or a small tray. Once we're done cutting out as many circles as we can, we're going to put them in the freezer for 10 minutes before we bake. If you have any discs that won't come off easily, just use your small offset spatula to gently release it and lift it onto the tray. I was able to get 23 sablé discs out of my dough, which is way more than you need. So if you want, you can just cut your dough in half before you roll it, because that's about all you'll need. Once you've gotten all the circles you can out of your dough, you can press all the scraps together, re-roll it, fridge it if it gets too soft, and stamp out more circles. Just repeat the process until you've used up all of your dough. Line a baking sheet with a perforated silicone baking mat and top with 6 to 8 of your sablé discs. Place another perforated silicone baking mat on top of your sablé. This will help make sure that they bake nice and flat. Bake for 10 to 13 minutes at 350 degrees Fahrenheit or until they are just a nice light golden brown. The sapphire mirror glaze represents the gorgeous blue cover of the book. Combine gelatin and cold water, stir that until there are no lumps remaining, then set it aside to bloom. In a small saucepan, combine water, sweetened condensed milk, sugar, and light corn syrup. Stir until well combined, then place over medium heat. Cook the mixture, stirring regularly until it reaches 217 degrees Fahrenheit. Remove that sweetened mixture from the heat and set aside. I've got my chopped white chocolate in a blending cup, and I'm adding just a smidgen of blueberry powdered color from the Sugar Art. It's their Master Elite line. Pour the hot liquid over top and let that sit for about 30 seconds to a minute just to start melting the chocolate. Add the Bloom's gelatin and stir with your spatula until the chocolate is basically completely melted. It's okay if there are still a few lumps. Use an immersion blender to completely emulsify your mirror glaze. Once it's nice and smooth, you can pour it into a measuring glass with a spout. I like to pass it through a sieve to remove any lumps that might remain. Now we're just going to set the glaze aside and let it cool down to about 93 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the perfect temperature for pouring and glazing our mousse domes. Unmold one of your mousse domes and put it on a small overturned bowl or cup. Pour the glaze over, starting in the center and working your way out until the entire mousse dome is covered. If the glaze is too warm, it might slide off a bit and be too thin. You can always add a little bit more glaze if needed. Let the excess glaze drip off of the mousse for a few seconds. Remove the excess glaze with an offset spatula. Gently press some of the salted sand crumble around the edge of the mousse dome. After I filmed this one, I actually found it easier to transfer the mousse dome onto my sablé first, then hold that in my hand while I pressed the crumble on. If you want, pop a little more of that caramel on top of an espresso sablé, then use 2 small offset spatulas to carefully transfer your mousse onto your prepared sablé. Let your salted caramel cheesecake entremets thaw in the fridge for about 30 minutes, then dig in. Okay, fellow book nerds, please go read this book, and I'm going to convince you real quick. It's romantic, no spice but great steam. There's a love triangle that's actually done well, a very unique magic system, and Book 2, The Prince of Death and Darkness, comes out later this month. And if you want to enjoy all these flavors, but not all the faff, let's talk about a simple trifle. Place an espresso sablé in the bottom of a bowl or glass. Pipe or spoon a layer of the cinnamon-infused cheesecake mousse on top. Add a drizzle of the salt rum caramel and a second layer of the cheesecake mousse. And then a second layer of the salt rum caramel. Finish it off with a sprinkle of the salted sand crumble. Enjoy all the flavors of this entremet in a much simpler format. I hope you love these salted caramel cheesecake entremets as much as I do. They have all of my favorite flavor combinations. We've got a balance of salty and sweet. There's the roasty espresso, the bittersweet rum caramel, the rich and decadent cheesecake mousse. Absolutely insanely delicious to get all of this in one bite. If you read The Wind of Walkers and Blades, and there is a link down below in the description box if you're curious about it, comment and let me know if you think that the elements that I chose for these entremets really match up with the book. I think they do. Thanks so much for watching this massively long video today. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one. Happy baking!